Hello everyone, welcome to another exciting episode of Dayspring Discussions. I'm your host Sean McGahee. In this show we talk about movies, TV, sci-fi, fantasy, comic books. If you geek out about it, we're going to talk about it. You can listen to Dayspring Discussions on iTunes, YouTube, Podomatic, and Patreon, and contact Dayspring Discussions on the Facebook group, Twitter account, and dayspringdiscussions@gmail.com. Well, happy Thursday, everyone. Guys, today's the day. Dark Phoenix is going to be out in theaters for the mass public, and I am going to see it tonight. I'm excited to see it, but of course, the world premiere was a couple days ago. Reviews are coming out saying it's not that great, but they've been saying about the film for a while, so my expectations have kind of been lowered as is, so I'm not expecting anything phenomenal, and I'm okay with that. You know, not every film has to be the best film ever. I want it to be good, of course. I guess at this point, my expectation is that it just doesn't suck, and I would love some great X-Men Easter eggs, really. So what I'm going to do, I said I was going to do this, and I really wanted to, was talk X-Men films, okay? For almost the last 20 years, X-Men have been very influential in the superhero genre. The original X-Men film helping kick off really this new age of superhero crazed films. So I want to sit down, talk X-Men, go through them, you know, just to dissect each one just a little bit. Of course, you guys fire back on the social media groups and Gmail account. Let me know what you think. And we'll just do that, man. We'll go through the X-Men films and lead up to Dark Phoenix and just kind of go from there. I don't know how long I'm going to go. We'll just do it and see where it takes us. So obviously, the reason I want to do something like this is because I'm a huge X-Men fan. I think probably going all the way back to Age of Apocalypse in the mid-90s is really where I started to really get into X-Men. Of course, I watched the X-Men animated cartoon, and I read, X-Men comic books, but it really wasn't until I think Age of Apocalypse that I became a hardcore fan, and ever since then, I've read X-Men comics. I mean, that's kind of where it started, where I've been a regular reader of the comics ever since, haven't stopped. What I like about the X-Men is it's in the phrase, in their catchphrase, sworn to protect a world that fears and hates them. That's quite a bit. When you look at the Marvel groups, you have the Avengers, and they're pretty much world defenders. They're heroes, so to speak. The Fantastic Four, they're more explorers and scientists. They go off on a lot of weird missions to explore the unknown, where the X-Men just try to take care of themselves. Mutants, when it started out, was an allegory for racism and have kind of evolved throughout the years for, other things such as, homophobia and other things that where people who are different get persecuted for. And that's really what it's all about is, someone who is different and is being hated on for it. The X-Men are a way of, venting that, of making an allegory for it, and really, sending a message, I guess, is what it is. But another thing I like about the X-Men personally is that they all live in areas of gray, I guess you would say, because there's this great one comic book in Uncanny X-Men #1, not the very first one, but Uncanny X-Men, it was several years ago when Wolverine and Cyclops divided up. And Cyclops' team was all sitting around the table, and I think it was Storm who said, anyone who has ever been considered a villain, please raise your hand. And almost everyone except for like 2 people raised their hands. They flip back and forth, okay? They live in areas of gray, and, these moral choices that they make, or personal choices they make, will determine whether they're villains or heroes. I mean, even, people who consider the biggest Boy Scout of the X-Men, Cyclops, is considered a villain at some point in the Marvel Universe. It's interesting, to mess with that morality of the human condition and character and stuff like that. And I really enjoy it. A lot of much. So, again, big X-Men fan. Yes, I named the show after an X-Men reference. So, yeah, I like X-Men. The films haven't always been the best. I'm going to talk about that, of course, too. And I think that's about it. So let's just get into it, starting off with X-Men in 2000. Now, a lot of people will very much quote this as the beginning of the superhero film craze. I kind of go threefold on this, okay? Back in 1997, you had Batman and Robin, very campy, very crappy. Still, it's one of my favorite bad films to watch. That really, kind of put people off on superhero films, but really they've never been big since then. You had the Christopher Reeve Superman films. You had, the Batman films started with Michael Keaton and Tim Burton, and then occasionally had other things like The Incredible Hulk and stuff like that. Several cartoons, but really nothing up on the big screen too much. And with Batman and Robin, it really was kind of a down note. But then you had Blade in 1998, and Blade was really a character that people didn't know was a comic book character. He was a second, third tier character, and people liked that film. And lo and behold, of course, a couple years down the road, we get X-Men, which, X-Men dominated the 90s as far as comic book superhero teams with the help of the animated series. And then a couple years later, you had Spider-Man, probably one of the most popular superhero characters ever. And I think it was those three films that started off and really jump-started the superhero film craze that we're still living in today. I think a lot of people point to X-Men because of the fact that it was a very popular property of the time. So it was kind of all eyes on that compared to being on Blade. More people were watching that. But also the fact that Bryan Singer did a different take where he took the material very seriously. I mean, I think Richard Donner did that with the first couple Superman movies. I think Tim Burton did that with the first couple of Michael Keaton Batman films. And then, of course, when Joel Schumacher came on, I think made them campy, lost their way. I mean, if you read comic books, these are adult situations. A lot of Marvel and DC comic books, have their rating of at least teenager age, where they're, a lot of dire adult mature situations. So, kids have their own separate comic books nowadays, but the main books are really meant for teenagers to adults. I mean, the film starts off with a boy in a Nazi prison camp watching his mother get taken away from him, and we all know that she's probably going to die. I mean, it's pretty hardcore stuff they start off with there. And then you have the character of Rogue, who anyone she touches, she can basically kill them. It's a serious situation, and it was interesting to see, again, just the take or the angle finally played off on the big screen. Now, as far as the quality of the film, I mean, at the time it was good, yes. I look back now, and it's still decent. I went back, of course, and watched all 11 X-Men films. And this first X-Men movie, after a while, it kind of lost its luster, given the fact that we've got such better comic book and superhero films later on, especially X-Men films. So it's not, one of my top 3 or top 4, I think, in the X-Men films even. But it's okay, knowing the time it came out and what it was trying to do in the early stages of the superhero film craze. I think it still stands up pretty good. I mean, not great, but I think it's definitely still got that rewatchability. The characters, of course, make it good. And just being introduced to this whole world was great. Casting was, of course, great for the most part, in my opinion. Hugh Jackman, of course. We're going to talk a lot about Hugh Jackman when it comes to the X-Men, because that's the key character to everything, right? Wolverine, very popular character, the kind of anti-hero, so they focused on him and him introduced to Xavier's school and the X-Men and what it all means. He wasn't even supposed to be Wolverine. Little trivia, guys, is that Dougray Scott, the guy who at the time had been in that Drew Barrymore's Cinderella movie Ever After, he was actually set to play Wolverine, bailed out because he wanted to do Mission Impossible 2 with Tom Cruise. He's got to be kicking himself for this one. But then Hugh Jackman slid in. People weren't too happy with the fact that Hugh Jackman, an Australian Broadway actor, was going to play the tough guy Wolverine. He's too tall. He's over 6 foot. Wolverine's supposed to be 5'4". And, this guy's a dancer and singer. What's he doing playing Wolverine? All this stuff. I get it. But the fact that, he came in and now we can't imagine anyone else playing the part, of course, says something about what kind of performer Hugh Jackman is. Patrick Stewart, Professor X, obvious choice. Obvious choice, of course, going all the way back to, the Star Trek Next Generation days. If you were to ask anyone, who would you see playing Professor X? It'd be Patrick Stewart. So they got Patrick Stewart, which was awesome. Ian McKellen as Magneto, great actor. I love the way he dictates his words, really. It's interesting. I love his performance. And then you got James Marsden as Cyclops. Guys, of course, if you listen to my show at any length of time, I'm a big Cyclops guy. And the way he was treated in these first 3 films, hate it. Absolutely hate it. I'm going to talk more about that later on. But I like James Marsden as the character. But he was really just a side tool to the whole love triangle with him and Jean and Wolverine. And it was not good. Rebecca Romijn as Mystique. She was okay. Mystique character is a little more interesting, I think, in the comic books than what they gave her to do. But again, this is an early film of the X-Men franchise. The main focus was on Charles and Magneto and Wolverine. And sadly, that's where the X films focus really stayed, which there are plus and minuses to it, which I'll talk more about. Tyler Mane is Sabretooth. You got a wrestler to play a character. I really like, even though it's not great of a film, I love a lot more what Lee Shriver did with the character with that. Shawn Ashmore is Iceman. It's not Iceman. I mean, Bobby Drake, of course, is more of a prankster, not more of a goody-goody, but, it'll do. And then the ladies. So the 2 ladies, Femke Jensen as Jean Grey and Halle Berry as Aurora Monroe. I have no doubt these 2 are great performers. Halle Berry, I think, has an Oscar. Femke Jensen, I've seen her enough to know she's a great performer as well. With Halle Berry, I think it was the material they gave her and what she had to work with that really, stunted that character. With Femke Jensen, at this point, I'd only seen her in GoldenEye, where she played, a killer spy, bad guy. So to see her play the quintessential girl next door of Jean Grey didn't work. Didn't work for me at all throughout the entire saga or trilogy. It just didn't work for me. Not saying that she's not a great performer, but Jean Grey, again, it could have been the material they gave her, but I just didn't like it. Didn't like it at all. But the film itself, like I said, it's pretty decent. It's one of those, it's the pioneer, I guess you would say, guys. And for that, it will always have, or should have, our respect. Okay, so then that brings us to the next X-Men film in 2003, X2, X-Men United. And for a while, it probably was one of the better or best comic book films out there. I mean, it's still pretty good. Again, I rewatched it. It's still got a lot of rewatchability. Again, it's just that style that Bryan Singer brings of making it, more serious take compared to some of the other comic book or superhero films before its time. Expanding the mythology, of course, still focusing on Wolverine. I get it. He's the anti-hero. He's cool or whatever. But again, expanding a little bit. I love they brought in Nightcrawler in this one. Alan Cumming did a great job with the character. I wish he would have stuck around more for X3 or do something more with him. And you got in Pyro as well. Brought in, again, just expanded everything as far as the universe. That scene where the soldiers attack the school, still one of the best scenes in comic book film history. I really love it, of course. One of the best lines, too, with Hugh Jackman saying, "You picked the wrong house, bub." Great scene with that. But, of course, again, my man Cyclops still gets the shaft for this one over the Jean Grey Wolverine love story, allegedly, which I don't get it. Yes, in the comics, there's always been this flirtation between Wolverine and Jean, but when it comes down to it, there's no doubt that Jean and Cyclops are the couple. Anyone who's read X-Men comics for any period of time know that Wolverine and Jean have no chance of being together outside alternate realities like X-Men Apocalypse It's always Cyclops and Jean. Always will be Cyclops and Jean. And I'm trying to get off my high horse on this one. But anyway, X-Men 2, yeah, much enjoyable film. Again, my only complaint really about it is that Cyclops doesn't get a lot of screen time. But that's the thing, too, with these characters is you're adding... The X-Men have always been a team, you know? You can't really do a lot of solo stuff with them outside of Wolverine, even in the comics, but you keep adding characters and, you know, they're supporting characters. One thing, again, like I said with the X-Men film, is the focus has always been on Charles and Eric and Logan, which is fine, really, if you want to do that, but keep adding characters that I know are great and doing nothing with them is kind of what ticks me off about these X-Men films. Wasting characters that I know could do so much more than what you give them just makes me a little frustrated as a longtime X-Men fan, which I'll talk more about that as I go along here. Now, this film ends with a little bit of a teaser, of course, giving us a little bit of the Phoenix in this one. And, you know, a lot of people are thinking the third film is going to be the Phoenix Saga, the Dark Phoenix Saga, whatever you want to call it. But then Bryan Singer leaves the franchise. He goes and does Superman Returns, which is a film I enjoy. I know some people don't, but I enjoy that one. And then Brett Ratner comes in to take over for X3. Now, I don't know the full details of the behind-the-scenes drama. I'm pretty sure Brett Ratner came into the film very late in the project, from what I remember. But I still curse his name for this film. I remember walking out of this film. It was 2006, I believe. And Superman Returns, you know, the film that Bryan Singer had left, I think, X3-4 possibly. I walk out of the film and I see the poster for Superman Returns. And I walk up to the film and I'm like, please don't suck. Because I was so disappointed in X3. To me, you could barely call it an X-Men film. I really don't know if this or Wolverine Origins are my least favorite X-Men films. It's really, really close as far as how bad both these films are as far as X films. None of the characters really acted like themselves or how they were supposed to act. It was just really disappointing. I remember Halle Berry actually said she wouldn't come back for the third film unless she got a bigger role, which she did, and understandable. You know, Storm is a good character. You could do a lot with her. But again, the fact that they're still focusing on Eric and Charles and Logan and Jean, you know, didn't leave much for anyone else to do, which is why they got rid of Cyclops so early. And James Marsden went in to be in Superman Returns. Again, treatment of Cyclops totally sucks. It's a pity they wasted James Marsden. But anyway, trying not to get into that, trying to stay focused. But with X3, they kind of combined two X-Men storylines. They did Dark Phoenix, but they also did The Cure, which was the first Joss Whedon Astonishing X-Men run. And it didn't work. Now, of course, they were playing with the Dark Phoenix storyline of this, where instead of Phoenix being a cosmic entity that takes over Jean and, you know, feels the sensations of humanity and goes crazy, really it's the fact that Jean is so powerful, Xavier had to put up psychic barriers to stop her from hurting a lot of people, and in doing so created a multiple personality disorder in someone called the Phoenix inside of Jean. It comes out, goes crazy, and at the end, of course, Phoenix got to go. Again, you bring in some other great additions for this one. You had Kelsey Grammer as Hank McCoy, a.k.a. Beast. Great addition. Great addition. Couldn't have thought of anyone better at the time to play Beast. Then you had Ben Foster come in to play Warren Worthington III as Angel. Ben Foster, one of the most underrated actors in the last 20 years. Great addition. Again, you didn't do anything with him, though, which sucked. Ellen Page, one of her first really big roles as Kitty Pryde. Decent job. Oh, Vinnie Jones as Juggernaut. That was horrible. That was so horrible. Not even like the character at all. The only thing I really liked about this film was the Iceman pyro fight. I mean, that was probably the highlight of the film for me, and mainly because that Iceman went full, ice shield and everything like that to defeat him. Didn't like at the part there where when they're all jumping in to save the day and Kitty's got Bobby. He should have rode in on his ice sled. Of course, they fixed that in Days of Future Past and showed us an awesome Iceman. I get that. Depowered Rogue. Really, after the first film, what else are you going to do with Rogue? That was kind of the thing about Anna Paquin's character is after, you showed this dangerous mutant and had her team up with Logan to introduce everyone to the X-Men world, there was nothing to do with the character, I think, at that point. So giving her the cure, sure, it was something for the character to do, given the fact that she feels she is dangerous to people around her, and the cure would make sense. But, I think they really just, again, had nothing to do with her, so that's where they went with the character. And, again, Brett Ratner, I curse his name for this film. I really shouldn't, though, because I think there are a lot more people that helped ruin this movie more than he. Also, the fact that it was still early on in the superhero craze where people didn't know just how big this genre could be or will be. So they made it a trilogy. They made a trilogy to complete and wrap everything up. And, killing off characters like Professor X and Cyclops, depowering Magneto, really trying to wrap it up tightly and almost be the end of the X-Men films. And that was really the big mistake, I think. The big mistake was thinking that the X-Men could go no less than 3 films, when really, given the characters, how many characters you had to work with, even if you dropped Wolverine, you had a lot more characters, and in my opinion, a lot better characters to work with in further films. Sticking with the dark days of the X films, X-Men Origins Wolverine 2009, it was the origin story that, nobody really wanted. Kind of like a solo film, No one wanted to see the anti-hero be how he became the anti-hero. And it should have stayed that way. There were a couple good positive things about this film. Liev Schreiber as Victor Creed, aka Sabretooth. I thought, he, being a terrific performer, did a great job with that character, fleshing him out. Sabretooth and Wolverine's relationship is very interesting, of course. I love how it played out in this film and how they showed it, so I will give him that. Taylor Kitsch, Friday Night Lights guy. Remy LeBeau. Gambit used to be one of my favorite X-Men characters when I was a kid. I've grown up a little more. That's why Cyclops is more of my taste. He's a great actor. Well, good actor, I guess. And again, it's one of those things where I think with a lot of these characters and actors they bring in for these films, he's a good actor that they gave him nothing to do, is what it is. If they would have given him more to do, I think he really could have done more with the character, but it was really just satisfying the fans. It'd be like, hey, Gambit's a popular character. Let's bring in Gambit. And same thing with Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool. Luckily, he gets to shine more in it later on in one of his own films. But, they bring Ryan Reynolds in, who is a great Deadpool, until they sew his mouth shut. And that kind of goes downhill from there. So those are positive things about the film. Everything else about this film is crap. I mean, Hugh Jackman, of course, is Hugh Jackman, but I remember when you watch the film too, when he first gets his metal claws and he's in those farmer's bathroom, those claws, the CGI looks absolutely horrible. Horrible. Some cheesy lines, some cheesy characters. Ugh. Oh, God, this film. I don't think I want to talk any more about that to say it's, again, this and X3 were the down bottom of the barrel as far as X films, and I don't know which one I dislike more. Maybe I'm gonna rank my films. I finished rewatching all of them. Let me rank my X films before I go see Dark Phoenix, and I'll put that up on my Facebook group here in a little bit. But yeah, Adamantium Bullet makes him forget his memory. Why? Why? Okay, next up, guys, we're jumping to 2011 X-Men First Class. Now, this was directed by Matthew Vaughn, who did Kick-Ass. He's also done Kingsman, so, he's this is kind of his first forte into the comic book genre. Before this, he did Layer Cake with Daniel Craig. And to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of this film. This was, of course, a prequel story setting up how Eric and Charles met. And much like how they got Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen as phenomenal choices for Professor X and Magneto, they struck gold again with James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender. These guys have carried on these characters, added more depth to them, and it's just great what they've done with them. And really with this film too, I thought it should have focused more on them. Yes, you have your supporting characters, but when you look at it, they are the main part of this film. And I think if you would have made a much smaller film with them, without all the noise in the background, I think it could have been a much better film. Much like I think Logan or even, the first Deadpool film was very tight as far as characters. This could have been a lot better if they would have tightened up the cast and the characters and the focus a little bit more. I own this on Blu-ray, and honestly, when I bought it on Blu-ray, the only reason I bought it is because of the fact that it was the setup for X-Men Days of Future Past. Now, as I watch it, I go back, and again, it's kind of on that level, I think, with the first X-Men film, probably a bit below, in my opinion, because of all the white noise that is really just pointless in it. But it's decent. Not in my top 5 as far as X films, but, it's not horrible like, say, an X3 or a Wolverine. This is really, like I said, if we're looking at a hill, okay, and, X3 and Wolverine Origins are the downward part of the hill, X-Men First Class is that little bit at the bottom that starts to go back up again, in my opinion. I love everything they did with Charles. I love everything they did with Eric. It's good stuff. A little cheesy, of course, that, how Charles loses his legs, in my opinion. But, they tried to take all that backstory and put it in one film, and really you can stretch it out over a course of several films. Now, as far as the rest of the cast, of course, Jennifer Lawrence as Raven/Mystique, that was a big part of the storyline, and she plays a big part in the prequel films, which really is something that bugs me most about these next set of films. Is granted, First Class was before Jennifer Lawrence was a big star and became Jennifer Lawrence. But by the time we get to Days of Future Past, she's a big name in Hollywood, so they kept giving her a bigger and bigger part. While Mystique herself is, yes, a decent character and a supporting character in the X-Men films, so the fact that she's so much front and center kind of bugs me. However, her relationship between Eric and Charles is interesting in the films, and I will give them that, but it's one of those things, I guess a lot of things with these X films is, yeah, the storyline they went with is okay, but they could do it so much better if they, knew more about the comics and what, you could do with the characters. Rose Byrne as Moira McTaggart, in the X3, she's a scientist we briefly see. In this one, she's a CIA agent. Of course, she's got that kind of love interest with Charles in this one, which, decent, I guess. The character's a little more interesting, I guess, than what they make, or a little more different. But again, you're dealing with a lot of characters, so be it. Our bad guy, Kevin Bacon, Sebastian Shaw. It's Kevin Bacon, man. You don't mess with Kevin Bacon. He does what he does, and I am okay with that. His supporting cast of villains, though, January Jones is Emma Frost. Emma Frost, of course, at the time, was with the X-Men, more of a hero, but she's also got that little slant to her. She dated Cyclops for quite a couple of years here in the comic books after Jean Grey died. And I always tell people, look, the three relationships between those characters are like, imagine Cyclops is Brad Pitt, Jean Grey is Jennifer Aniston, and Angelina Jolie is Emma Frost. Kind of how it would go, where she's kind of got that edge to her, I guess you would say. And again, January Jones, I don't think is a great actress, but the character is so much more than what they did with her. I really, wish they, had used her in a different way. It's one of those throwaway characters that, by Days of Future Past, she's dead, and it's disappointing for the franchise, in my opinion. Oliver Platt, Man in the Black Suit, a small character that, plays his role. Oliver Platt does what he does. He's great with that. They had Banshee in there. Sean Cassidy. Another character I think they could have done a lot more with, given my love for the character in the comic books, and they kind of threw that away. Alex Summers, Havoc, played by Lucas Till. We'll see him later, but again, another character that they did nothing with. They could have. I get it. Again, like I said, these characters, these films focus on Eric and Charles and Logan. I get it, but there are just so many other better characters. Let me take that back. There's so many other characters with good stories in the X-Men universe that never get explored. Nicholas Hoult as Beast still does what he does. He's great. I think Kelsey Grammer, in my opinion, is a better Beast, but for this, he serves his purpose just fine. So overall, like I said, this film, not one of my favorites when it comes to X-Men films, but it does set up my favorite X-Men film to come, and James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender are awesome as Charles and Eric. The next X film to come out was the second Wolverine film, The Wolverine, in 2013. Hugh Jackman, of course, comes back as the character, solo film, and I gotta say it's a much step up from the last Wolverine film, directed by James Mangold, who I'll talk about a little later on when we talk about Logan. Came in to direct this one, and they tried to explore Wolverine's kind of origins or his referencing to his time in Japan. It goes a little deeper beyond that in the comic books, but for this one, they just kind of went still real surface, where it's Logan post X3, and he's kind of living himself in exile after what he did in X-Men The Last Stand. Anyway, but you bring in a bunch of characters, and honestly, this is a decent film. Of course, having rewatched it again these last couple of weeks, it's a decent film. I'd probably put it more towards the middle of the X-Men films, maybe. The director's cut is great because there's that scene, especially, where, you see Wolverine and he's going to Japan. Well, you're immediately thinking about Wolverine fighting ninjas. And there's that scene where he's trying to go save the girl, and he gets surrounded by ninjas. And instead of fighting them, they just shoot him with arrows, and he goes down. But in the director's cut, there's a whole scene where he actually fights all these ninjas, smoking a cigar, and it's an awesome scene, which I don't get why they didn't have it in the original cut. It was a great scene. Oh, that's ludicrous that they took it out. But of course, the director's cut, he showed a little more blood, maybe a few more swear words. I get it, it's not necessary, but overall, if you're gonna watch this film, I recommend the director's cut. Not a lot of extra stuff which would put it leaps and bounds above the theatrical cut, much like how I think the uncut or unrated version of Batman v Superman is way beyond the theatrical cut, but it's still a little better. And just watching the theatrical cut of this film a week or two ago, it's still pretty decent. So again, it's one I'd recommend. And I'm not sure if you heard that, but it was my daughter calling me. She is on the couch, first day of her summer break, and of course yesterday she hurt her leg, so it's all wrapped up and she's on crutches. So what a way to start the summer, right? But if you hear someone calling, it's her calling because she allegedly needs something. Now, the post-credit scene of Wolverine does set up Days of Future Past a little bit. Wolverine's going through the airport, and he's seeing the video about the Sentinels. You also have Eric pop up, which, again, at the end of X3, he technically lost his powers, except for at the end there you saw him briefly move the chess piece. And then you see Charles roll in, who, if you didn't see the post-credit scene in X3, assumed was dead and what the hell's going on. Well, at the end, they were talking in the middle of X3 about, this body that Moira had, and Charles transferred his consciousness or something. I don't know how it works. Honestly, continuity has never been the strong suit of the X films. Whatever. You knew you had to bring Charles back at some point. So, anyway, it sets up Days of Future Past, which in my opinion, and opinion of a lot of people it seems like, since I took a poll this week, is the best X-Men film. And to me, it's not only my favorite X-Men film, it's like my number 2 and number 3 comic book film of all time. It doesn't, follow the story too much as far as Days of Future Past. I remember when I first heard about kind of what they were going to do with it, and in the original storyline, it's Kitty Pryde who goes back to her younger conscience and tries to warn the X-Men of what's to come. And when I heard it was going to be Wolverine, I was like, oh God, they're still focusing on Wolverine. Why? But of course, the way they explained it in the film and why Wolverine was the one who should go back, it made sense. And that's really what it is. You can give me a totally ludicrous idea that I think sounds stupid, but like everything, it's in the execution. You execute it well, explain to me why it makes sense, I'm on board. This one, of course, brings back the old characters like Halle Berry, Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen for the future stuff, while playing with the new characters, James McAvoy, Michael Fassbender, Jennifer Lawrence, and really, I don't know what's wrong with this film, honestly. I cannot tell you one thing I don't like about it. Maybe, of course, there's the whole Mystique thing where she still plays such a pivotal role. Of course, if you watch the Rogue cut, there's the cut where the Sentinels had, gotten their powers because of Mystique, when really, you come to find out that it was only a piece. It was more Mystique and Rogue together that kind of formed the Sentinels and how they were able to steal mutants' powers to fight against them. Introducing Evan Peters as Quicksilver was great. The scene we got, the way he was played in Days of Future Past, I thought was great. The way they go on to use him in Apocalypse, and I'm sure using him in Dark Phoenix, not a huge fan of, but that's all right. And again, a lot of characters that were introduced in this film that I think didn't get enough play. Omar Sy as Bishop, a great X-Men character, really a side character in this one. You brought in, of course, Lucas Till back as Havoc. He had a very small scene in this. Blink. I love Blink. Of course, being a fan and of Age of Apocalypse, I love the character of Blink. Sunspot was in there. Colossus, a good version of Colossus. Shawn Ashmore returned as Iceman, a really good version of him, which was great. Just overall, the film works on so many levels. And to me, these prequel films are about, of course, the forming of the X-Men characters we come to know, whether it be in the comics or in that first film. And what I tell people is X-Men First Class is how Eric Lenscher becomes Magneto. And to me, this film is about how Charles Xavier becomes Professor X. It's how he becomes the person he needs to be to lead and form the X-Men. He's in a very dark place in this film, and James McAvoy, in my opinion, should have got some kind of award recognition for his performance in this film because he plays it so well. Of course, James McAvoy, a tremendous performer in general, so I do love it, but I don't know this film, if you see a flaw in this film that I haven't mentioned, please let me know, because aside from the fact that I wish that had more Cyclops in it, I really enjoyed this film. Again, one of my top favorite comic book films ever, probably definitely in my top 25 to 30 films ever that I enjoy the most. But in any event, guys, X-Men Days of Future Past, I think we can go without saying, was the height of the X-Men films. But there's a couple more peaks to come. That was 2014. We jump ahead to 2016. Deadpool. Ryan Reynolds returns as the Merc with a Mouth. So beforehand, of course, I want to talk a little X-Men time stream, okay? Because what Days of Future Past did was pretty much reset the time stream. And, as far as going in chronological order, here's my understanding of this, okay, is Days of Future Past, the past stuff took place in 1973. So everything from 1973 onward that we'd already gotten got reset. So that means X-Men First Class, which takes place in 1963, that film still is part of both the original timeline and the new timeline, okay? But X1 through X3, Wolverine Origins, which takes place in the 80s, and then the Wolverine, the second Wolverine film, all those technically got erased to where within the timeline we're left with just X-Men First Class and the events of 1973 from Days of Future Past. So then thinking going forward, everything else counts. You jump to X-Men Apocalypse in the 80s, and with Deadpool, now that it's post Days of Future Past, I'm assuming, of course, it's in the new timeline. They even make a joke about, McAvoy versus Stewart as far as playing Professor X. So I'm thinking at least those 4, 5, technically 4.5, what do you want to say, films are in the storyline. I'll get to Logan about where I think that falls in the timeline. But anyway, Deadpool, Ryan Reynolds comes back. People were severely disappointed. Deadpool's a fan favorite. The way he was treated in X-Men Origins, not a lot of people liked it. But he came back, and this was the Deadpool people wanted. I remember, thinking it was an X-Men / superhero film. Sitting in theaters, a lot of people brought their kids. And it's R-rated, people, okay? It's R-rated, okay? Don't worry if it's a superhero genre film. Look at the rating. It was R-rated, very bloody, very, vulgar, and it was great. Absolutely great. Absolutely what a Deadpool film should be. Breaking the fourth wall. And again, like I said, it was a tight film. Not a lot of characters, a lot of focus on the hero. It was great. I mean, some people, of course, have gone on to say, well, look, superhero films are rated R. They can work. No, okay? Go back. There are other superhero genre type films or comic book films that have been rated R that haven't worked, okay? It has nothing to do with the R rating or the PG-13 rating. It's the execution. As any film, as anything in life, it's how you execute it is how it's going to work. And this film was executed great. I have other feelings about Deadpool 2, which I'll get to, but as far as this one goes, all around, again, I really can't say anything bad about this film because I can't think of anything that was really bad about this film, in my opinion. If you can think of anything, of course, fire back, let me know, and I'll be glad to dissect that with you. So later on that year, we got X-Men Apocalypse. The sequel to Days of Future Past and First Class. This one, we're reintroducing some of our older characters like Cyclops, Jean Grey, Storm. They were introduced in younger versions for this film. The main bad guy played by Oscar Isaacs. And of course, a lot of people started hating on this film when those Entertainment Weekly pictures came out and showed him a little more purple. Also, Oscar Isaac's not a very tall guy, so people were criticizing Apocalypse for that. I get that people aren't a big fan of Apocalypse as a film. Totally understandable. As an X-Men fan, though, I like this film because it has so many little Easter eggs and so many little tidbits that I, as an X-Men fan, enjoy. You have psychic battles. You have Magneto messing with Earth's magnetic pole. You have, of course, the Phoenix moment by Jean Grey in it. As a Cyclops fan, I enjoyed some of the stuff they did with him. I didn't like how he was, kind of a bad boy or whatever with an attitude, whatever on that. But I like how they messed with his vision. Like there was the scenes, of course, where he first put on the glasses and you could see what he sees, which is all red. And then later on, they did a point of view where he was shooting at Apocalypse and you saw what he was seeing when he opened his eyes, even though he's shooting out laser beams. I thought that was very interesting. I don't see that a lot in the comic books too. So I thought that was really cool what they did with that. But again, the new additions on this, Oscar Isaacs, you had Sophie Turner, aka Sansa Stark, as Jean Grey. Not great, in my opinion, but I think Sophie Turner is an okay actress. I'm very curious. I think Dark Phoenix is really going to show us what she can do. as far as her range. I think in Game of Thrones, she got to develop the character a little more with Sansa, and in the end, really played that really well. If she can play a character like Jean Grey in Dark Phoenix, I think I will go from saying she's an okay actress to a good actress. I'll let you know after tonight, of course, on that. Ty Sheridan, he is a good actor, of course. Steven Spielberg just doesn't pick anybody to lead his films, okay? But he did a great job with Ready Player One. And while, I love seeing Cyclops more dominant in the film, his choice of the way they wanted him to play the character is a little off. Cody Smith McPhee, Nightcrawler's back. Loved it. Perfectly what a young Nightcrawler should have been. Great. Ben Hardy as Angel. Again, the tragic part of the Horsemen is that the Horsemen were all great characters, aside from Magneto, that they did nothing with. Alexandra Shipp as Storm, great character. Angel, great character. And of course, Psylocke, played by Olivia Munn. All these great characters with great history that you didn't have time to really explore or get to know, and you probably never will, which sucks. I would much rather them have gone a different way or played with, left them out or done something different with these characters. But it's kind of what it comes down to the X films too. There are so many good, as an X-Men fan, there are so many good X-Men characters, each of them with their own great past and history and mythology, but you never have time to get into them and explore it because you're so focused on Charles and Eric, which is a good story. Don't get me wrong. It's a great relationship to play off of, but if you're going to focus on these characters constantly with those two and Mystique throughout the entire trilogy, I'd rather you just leave the rest of it out. And again, make it a smaller film, much like, Deadpool was, smaller in scope, just to focus on those characters and not really kind of waste the other characters, in my opinion. But anyway, I liked Apocalypse. Again, it was good. I think it was a decent X-Men film. I'd like to see them where they shine with these younger characters later on, with Cyclops, Jean Grey, Quicksilver, Storm, the next generation. I hope they play a bigger part in Dark Phoenix. Obviously, Jean Grey will, but also with Dark Phoenix, of course, as a Cyclops fan, my biggest complaint is the lack of Cyclops in the original or first telling of the Dark Phoenix in Last Stand. Really pissed me off on that one. So he is such a quintessential part of the Dark Phoenix saga or storyline in the comics. I hope that Ty Sheridan and Cyclops get to play a big role in Dark Phoenix, and I'll figure out in a couple hours, guys. I will figure out in a couple of hours just how I feel about this film. But X-Men Apocalypse, I think it's decent. Not one of my favorites, but I think it's a decent X-Men film. All right, 2 films left. After X-Men Apocalypse, the next year we got Logan. This was Hugh Jackman's swan song to the character that he has played for many years now, many different times. Probably the longest running anyone has ever played a comic book character. And it's it's one of those films that, much like, say, The Dark Knight and how I feel about Winter Soldier, it transcends the genre. It's one of those films that makes you forget you're watching a comic book or superhero film and just tells a really good story. They're playing on the Old Man Logan storyline just a little bit in this one, and it's such a great film. It plays on so many different levels as far as just the human condition. I finished watching it yesterday, and gosh dang, it's really good. James Mangold, who is recently, his next film coming out is Ford and Ferrari with Christian Bale and Matt Damon. My interest for that film is higher because knowing what he did with Logan. So it's great. Again, a couple characters that, they could have done a little more with. But again, this film is a little more smaller, much like Deadpool and the Wolverine. Less characters, more focus on them. And that's what really plays out well in this film is the journey that our main character and just one or two other characters are going through. Again, tell me a flaw in this film, because I don't see one. Okay, and the last one on my list, Deadpool 2, came out last year, guys. I recently, again, watched this film a couple days ago. You know, when I watched it, I wasn't fairly impressed with it. It's one of those things with like comedy sequels do, is they take what was funny about the first film, or great, and they overdo it in the second film. And I think in some part it did do this. Again, it's one of those things where you bring in more characters, you try to widen the scope a little bit, and it's not. I'd rather keep it tight. I mean, I do think it was funny what they did with X-Force. Zazie Beetz' Domino was great. You know, I want to see more of her, definitely. Josh Brolin as Cable, I think was a good choice for Cable. The problem is they didn't do anything with Cable, okay? Again, it's just me having read X-Men comics for many years, knowing the history of the characters and how interesting they are. I know Josh Brolin signed up for several films, but of course, with them ending the 20th Century Fox X-Men universe, you're not going to get to do anything with it. So really all we know Cable as is a guy who lost his family, traveled back in time, and is a bit of a hard ass. When there's so much more to this character they did nothing with. And I love, of course, in a very special Deadpool, what was that? The PG-13 version they did. I saw it in theaters too, where Deadpool's reading it to Ben Savage, or Fred Savage, excuse me. Ben Savage is Boy Meets World. Fred Savage, and he's talking about, oh, Cable, you know, this and that, and he's talking about the whole history of Cable, and he's like, yeah, we didn't do any of that. Kind of, you know, just I think I was the only one in the theater who laughed out loud, really loud, given the fact that I knew what they could do with Cable and what they didn't do with him. Now, I think, again, Josh Brolin was a great choice. I'm just very disappointed with what they didn't do with him. I'm also very disappointed what they did with Vanessa in this. You know, she was such a pivotal role and the motivation behind the entire first film, and they pretty much dumped her, is what it is, and went away with Deadpool of kind of like trying to save this kid. And it was, I didn't like that part of it, especially, you know, the fact that Cable came back in time because this kid's going to kill someone and it's going to start bad things as far as the apocalypse for mutants. Wasn't that Days of Future Past? Wasn't that the whole thing with Raven where, you know, she kills Trask and starts, you know, triggers the apocalypse when she first murders someone, much like how Fire Fist was going to do? I mean, get another storyline, for God's sakes. Ugh. And also the kid. I mean, I say this about, you know, a lot of the kid actors. I said this about, say, you know, Jake Lloyd in episode 1. If you're going to get a kid as the main character, or kind of the main motivation, I guess you would say, get a kid we like. This kid was an asshole. Okay, and I granted, of course, he's in a Deadpool film. He's allowed to be a bit of a little bitch, I would say, but make a cool kid. You know, make a kid who I actually want to see Deadpool save, where I'm like, kill this kid. He's a little bitch. Kill him, please. And they didn't do that. Other characters, of course, kind of wasted Black Tom. A better Juggernaut than what we got in Last Stand, but still, again, someone they could have done more with. Again, just, I guess, the story, some of the story points in this, I'm not a huge fan of. I would definitely put it there with First Class, where the more I watch it, the more enjoyable I think it is. But at the same time, I think it's going to be probably my number 3 least favorite of the X films, just because of what they try to do with the characters. And that's it, guys. Okay, that brings us up to speed to 2019 tonight. X-Men Dark Phoenix. It's the alleged final film in this universe. Of course, you have the New Mutants film, which nobody even knows is going to see the light of day. It needs reshoots, but this is a Dark Phoenix, directed by Simon Kinberg, who has been a producer and writer on this X-Men universe for many years now, okay? And it's his first directing debut, and people had a lot of worries about this. Reviews are coming out saying it's not great, but a lot of people are saying even though it's not great, it's not exactly bad either. So I'm going in with low expectations, and I'll get what I get. And of course, next week I will talk all about it. It's the X-Men, it's what I love. And really, it's the culmination of this entire almost 20-year story where I think films like the original X-Men started the craze, helped, jumpstart everything. And films like Deadpool and Logan transcended the genre and showed, a different angle of how to tell superhero and comic book films. And of course, Days of Future Past being a masterpiece of the genre. Granted, of course, it has some low notes in this 11 film saga, but I think the high notes are really high notes that stand up there with some of the best, superhero comic book films of all time. And, it's just an end of an era, I guess you would say. Now they're going to hook up with Marvel, possibly going to be the MCU. I mean, more than likely they're going to be the MCU. I think it's a mistake because even in the comics, X-Men have always had their little pocket of the Marvel Universe where they have so many characters to play with, you don't need to put them in with the other characters of the Marvel Universe to, have enough interesting things to do. X-Men, they have their own thing going on, and I wish they would keep it a separate universe. I don't think they will, but it's what it is, guys, and this is it. This Dark Phoenix is going to be the end, minus New Mutants, but we're not going to count that one. So as an X-Men fan, there are some films I really like, some films I haven't. I think I've been a little more critical of these films than a lot of people have too, as well, again, just because of my love for the X-Men. And of course, I always tell people there are 3 things if you want me to not shut up about, you bring up. 1 is Star Wars, 2 is Superman, and 3 is X-Men. I could talk about those 3 things all day long. And obviously, I've talked almost an hour now just about these films. But it's time to say adieu, guys. I got to go take my daughter to lunch and pretty much occupy her now that she is immobile for at least a little while. Anyway, time for you to fire back, of course. Give me your X-film list. I'm about to pause this, stop it, and do my X-film list on Facebook. You, of course, fire back. Let me know what yours is. What are some of your highlights? What are some of your low points of this film franchise? And, of course, are you planning on checking out Dark Phoenix this weekend? I hope you are, if nothing else, just to support the X-Men and the genre. And I will be back next week. Probably Lisa will be with me, and we will give our review of X-Men Dark Phoenix. By then, I might have seen it twice. I don't know. We'll see how it goes, guys. But that's it. Fire back, of course, on the Facebook group, Twitter account, and dayspringdiscussions@gmail.com. Hopefully next week I will be back on a regular schedule with every Tuesday and Wednesday. Life has happened, guys. Of course, we get busy, and I don't get paid to do this, so it's kind of at the bottom of my priorities list. But, of course, on that note, you can always head over to the Patreon page and donate $1. All I ask for is $1. That will give me more motivation to do more shows and hopefully maybe get better equipment too. Because honestly, guys, I do this show with a $20 microphone and a computer that I believe is about 8 years old. I edit it on Windows Movie Maker. So that's how low budget I am, of course. Maybe if I can step it up, I get a better show. But anyway, if you want to donate $1, greatly support me. So that's it, guys. Go out, enjoy your weekend, have a good one. Of course, go see Dark Phoenix. Until next time, may the Force be with us all.